A few years ago, during my time in the military, I experienced a night patrol that I will never forget. My colleague and I were stationed at a rather remote base, tasked with nightly patrols and security checks. While most of the time these duties were uneventful, that particular night changed my perspective on the job forever. On one side of the base was an abandoned storage area that had once housed equipment and supplies. Due to aging infrastructure, it was shut down, but we still had to patrol it periodically to ensure no one trespassed. The area always had a strange atmosphere, especially in the dead of night. Veterans would often tell stories of odd occurrences in the past, like soldiers who mysteriously disappeared or night shift personnel who heard inexplicable noises. I had always dismissed these as mere rumors, but that night, I personally encountered the fear behind those legends. That night, my colleague and I were making our rounds in a vehicle. The first few patrols went smoothly, and everything seemed quiet. Around 4 a.m., we drove toward the outer edge of the abandoned storage area. It was our final check of the night, and we were both eager to finish and head back to rest. However, as we entered the area, the air felt heavier, and everything around us grew eerily silent. Even the engine's noise seemed faint, as if the environment was swallowing the sound. As the vehicle slowly passed the empty structures, I suddenly felt a chill creeping up my spine. It was as though something was nearby. Then, I heard a strange noise, a distant, low moaning sound, sporadic and filled with what seemed like pain. I turned to my colleague and saw the same startled expression on his face. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded, his eyes filled with confusion and unease. We both sat in silence, unable to explain the eerie sound. The moaning grew louder, sounding as though it was circling us, filling the space with an unsettling sense of dread. It was as if someone was struggling, gasping for breath, or calling for help, but we were alone in the middle of a pitch-black night, with no visible sign of anything unusual. The tension was unbearable. Without a word, my colleague floored the gas pedal, and we sped out of the storage area. Neither of us looked back as we rushed toward the main base. Once we reached the safety of the main compound, we quickly locked the gates and reported the incident to our commanding officer. To our surprise, he didn't question us. Instead, he listened intently and then said calmly, "I believe you, because I've experienced something similar in that same place." He then recounted his own night patrol story, eerily similar to ours. Since that night, I've never patrolled that abandoned storage area alone. Though we saw nothing that night, the sound of that moan still lingers in my mind. Even now, thinking back to that patrol fills me with a sense of dread. It feels like something dark lurks in that area, something we may never fully understand, but something I never wish to encounter again. I haven't told this story to many people, except for my wife and a few close friends. It happened during my time as a radio operator in the Army, and I haven't forgotten it to this day. Fresh out of high school, I was drafted and sent to the front lines, unsure of what awaited me. On my first night, the air was heavy with humidity, and the ground was soaked from a recent storm. My duties were to manage communications between my unit and others. Soon, I was assigned to a new group that had just lost their previous radio operator to a landmine. One day, we were in the jungle, and gunfire broke out. It was chaotic, but we returned fire blindly, unsure of where the enemy was hiding. Eventually, we secured the area and found 3 dead enemy soldiers. It was the first time I had ever seen the enemy up close, and I couldn't shake the feeling of looking at bodies that were alive just moments before. A few days later, I was unexpectedly reassigned to a different unit under the command of a mysterious officer. His demeanor was cold, and the soldiers around him acted strangely, as if they weren't fully aware of their surroundings. They all had the same eerie, emotionless gaze that made me uneasy. I was instructed to stay in a small hut while they prepared for something, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeked inside a tent and saw something that made my stomach turn. On a table, there were 6 containers, each holding the severed head of an enemy soldier. Tubes and wires connected to the heads, and a green liquid bubbled around them. The heads twitched and quivered as if they were still alive. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder. The officer was furious that I had seen the contents of the tent and ordered me to return to my hut. The next thing I remember, I woke up in a medical tent with broken ribs and no memory of what had happened after that encounter. I never saw the officer or those soldiers again, and I often wonder what they were doing with those heads. The night was heavy, and the air was thick with tension. I sat in the vehicle, gripping the steering wheel tightly, listening to the faint crackle of the communication device. We had received a mysterious signal, a series of repeating numbers. The missing team had sent out a final distress call before disappearing without a trace. Today, we were ordered to head to the base and uncover the truth behind their disappearance. The vehicle rolled down a deserted path, its wheels crunching the soft earth beneath. The base came into view, a place that had once been bustling with life, now a desolate ruin. Buildings loomed in the darkness, windows shattered, iron gates rusted, as if awaiting someone to step through them again. "This place is too quiet," I muttered, breaking the silence in the vehicle. We stepped out, our footsteps soft on the scattered glass and spent shells. The smell of decay hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. Broken furniture and torn cloth were scattered across the ground, evidence of a violent struggle, but no one remained. We entered the command center, where darkness prevailed, with only a few pieces of equipment still functioning. The numbers were still playing, repeating in a mechanical voice that sent chills down my spine. 58,247 flashed repeatedly on the screen. I frowned, sensing there was a hidden truth behind these numbers. "What did these numbers mean?" I whispered. Just then, we noticed the entrance to the lab. The door was ajar, as if someone had forced it open in a hurry. We pushed it aside, and a strong odor of chemicals filled the air. The room was a mess, broken test tubes and scattered papers everywhere, with abandoned equipment left in haste, and then we saw them. The missing team lay sprawled across the floor, their faces frozen in terror. There were no visible injuries, no signs of struggle on their bodies, as if something invisible had struck them down suddenly. My heart raced, and sweat dripped down my forehead. In the corner of the room, a crumpled piece of paper caught my eye. It had the same sequence of numbers, 58,247, followed by the chilling words, "They are coming." A shiver ran down my spine. We immediately realized this was not just a rescue mission, we were now the next targets. Outside, the fog thickened, obscuring the road ahead. We had to escape. Without hesitation, we sprinted toward the vehicle, but as we neared it, a dark figure materialized through the mist. It was barely visible, moving silently. I froze in place, a wave of fear overwhelming me. We scrambled into the vehicle and started the engine, speeding away from that cursed place. The comms crackled again, breaking the eerie silence, but all we heard was that haunting sequence of numbers, 58,247. As the base disappeared into the rearview mirror, the weight of those numbers and the mystery they held pressed heavily on my mind. This wasn't just a distress signal, it was a warning. Though we had escaped, we knew the truth remained hidden. The shadows of that base still loomed over us, and the terror would not easily fade.